Hey, evening, Scott and JR. I assume you're good with me dialing in from down here. So MAB CD is on if you need us for anything.
No, that's great. Thank you, Chris.
Did he hear you?
If you want to come up, you're more than welcome, but we're glad you're here.
I don't think JR was so sure about that. He said I was supposed to stay away.
Are you able to get on that?
Yeah.
Oh, 6:30.
All righty. Good evening, everyone. I'll give it about another minute or two before we get started. I want to thank you all for joining us thus far. I know there's a few more folks that want to jump on. So here in about 2 minutes, we'll get started.
Gosh, I think I was on mute. Oh, now I'm not. So I want to.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I am Vice Mayor Brandon Johnson, council member for District 1. We actually have quite a few city staff on, so I won't go through the usual, just name everybody and say hello, but I will say that our city manager is on this call. We have our chief legal person and other folks from our legal department, folks from our planning department, and folks from law enforcement. Don't think I missed anyone there. Also, Camila Alexander, the community services representative for District 1, is on this as well. As you all know, we are here for unfortunate circumstances around what happened at the Airbnb home in Crown Heights. There's two issues here. One is a issue of the violence, the murder that happened, but the thing I've been hearing most about from many of you is regarding Airbnbs in Wichita, what that looks like and what we can do going forward to address that in a way that is beneficial to everyone. So tonight we wanted to have the discussion. WPD did do an impact meeting. We're getting those started again now that we see the light at the end of the tunnel with COVID. For those who did not or were not able to attend that, we do have WPD on the call to kind of talk through what that incident looks like on their end. And then we have staff to talk about kind of where we are in ideas and the zoning code with short-term rentals, which is what Airbnb is. And then love to have a discussion with all of you about potential solutions or concerns going forward with that to give us an idea of where we can go as a city to address this. So again, thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to kick over to WPD and kind of talk about what happened with the incident, what we know, what we can talk about before we get into, I know what many of you want to talk about with the Airbnb.
I can go ahead and kick that off. It's all right, Vice Mayor.
Go ahead, Chief. Thank you.
I'm Captain Cockendorfer. I work out of the Patrol East Station, and I live just a couple blocks from where the incident happened at. My folks responded over there on a series of neighbors that had called in a disturbance, vehicles that were speeding away, and apparent gunshots at about 2:30, quarter to 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a Sunday morning, Saturday night. My folks got over there and stopped some of the cars that were leaving the area. The vehicles that they stopped, there were people that had been attending the party. As they were gathering, pertinent information about that, more officers came into the area along with supervision, and they went over to the residence once we dialed in which house it was. And because there were phone calls that were coming out from different neighbors all up and down 2nd Street. So we didn't know exactly which house it was, if it was someone that was calling it in or if it was a house that it actually happened at. The officers figured out which house it was. They went inside and found what looked like a scene inside the residence. And then they found one victim that was outside. As this was going on, the hospitals were reporting that there were several more victims of apparent gunshots that showed up to the hospital. So we linked those two incidents together. And then is when we called in our investigators to go through, because there was, as most of you had seen, there was a crime scene all up and down 2nd Street and all up and down Batten, as far as shell casings and other debris that was laying out in the street. So our investigations came in. We were able to get a hold of the family of the deceased victim over there. Then's when I did the press release. Investigations worked for just about 24 hours over there, as probably most of you had seen. My folks, the community policing folks, and the beat officers over there threw together a quick impact meeting or an informational meeting to provide answers to citizens today, is what the acronym stands for. Just to let everybody know what was going on over there. And we had a great turnout. Just about 80 residents from the neighborhood came over there, gave what information we had. That case is still ongoing right now. We're waiting on a lot of our forensics to come back from the KBI lab to identify the types of weapons used, just different things like that. And that's pretty much where we're at right now with it.
Thank you, Captain. And again, I was typing this. This is being broadcast on social media. We talked about it earlier, but some of you jumped on later. There was substantial interest in this, so just wanted to share that for everyone paying attention. Also, what the captain just spoke to, again, WPD does impact meetings where they'll come out and talk to the community about incidents like this that happen, to give information to neighbors. So you're hearing what the 80 residents that the captain talked about have heard thus far. So appreciate that. Before we go forward, are there any questions of those on the Zoom regarding that part of the incident thus far?
Well, this is pertaining to the shooting in that area 3 to 4 weeks prior to that. I heard that had nothing to do with that, but you know, in the 4 to 5 years that I've lived here, I have not known of any other shootings, and that was on the Nextdoor app immediately after the shootings, and that was very concerning. And it was across the street, and in that same area at the same house, so it makes me think that there had to be some connection.
Are you talking about I'm sorry, are you talking about over on Coronado?
I'm on Coronado, but the shootings, the 3 to 4 weeks before that, happened in front of that same house on 2nd Street. The casings were found there.
Yes.
I can't help but believe that those are connected somehow.
We didn't have any other calls over there. And I know which one that you're talking about.
Mhm.
We found those casings that you're talking about. We had
Right.
found those all the way up north of 2nd Street on Coronado, or like Coronado and Pinecrest is the area. And with that one right there and that incident, those were vehicles that had started at Central and were in, we'll say, because that was in the early hours of the morning also.
Right,
That wasn't during the day.
right.
What happened there is there were two vehicles that got into some kind of confrontation and led themselves through the neighborhoods and came to a stop. Gunfire was exchanged there and on Pinecrest, probably in the 3 to 4, right where Coronado intersects it over there, and then down 2nd Street. That's where we found all the casings and stuff.
Okay.
But I do know which one you're talking about.
And
So-
you don't think there's any connection between those two things?
No,
Okay.
Cotledge Hill had a similar Airbnb that was hosting a big party, and then around the corner there were multiple guns fired with lots of shell casings over 3 and 4 yards. Again, this could be totally unrelated, and it was a couple months ago, but it sort of links into that Airbnb connection and the hosting of parties and bringing in traffic that we just don't want or need in our neighborhoods. So I'd sort of like, as part of this, to find out, do we have a listing from our police forces of how many Airbnb homes are connected to parties and or shootings that they have been involved in, so that we can get sort of a pattern at all?
yeah, absolutely. And that was the first thing that we did after this. This is something new to me. I'm not going to pretend that I've seen this. I've read about it across mainly on the East Coast, and that's where some of that legislation is coming into play. Because I had never been involved in something like this in 27 years, as far as Airbnbs. Now I know which one it is that you're talking about, the block that you're talking about over in College Hill on the other side of the street over there. I'm aware of that one. Did it stem from a party at that house? That I don't know. We did go and have our analysts, our crime analysts, review all the data, because it's not too hard to go out and find on any of the Airbnb sites where they are in the zip codes. I mean, I'm sure most people did it, the next morning after this incident happened and saw there was more over in Crown Heights. I know I did. And we're able to take and pull up those addresses and do a check to see if we've had repeat calls for service over there. So we know how to manage our community policing teams and stuff to see if we can, like you said, detect a pattern. And I have not found, at least I can't speak for the other bureaus or the other districts, but I have not found that to be an incident as far as violence goes. Now, I haven't looked to see how many parties have occurred because, I mean, the Patrol East Bureau goes all the way to the Butler County line, you know, like 21st Street North and 143rd East, you know, and there's a lot of homes and stuff out there. But that's exactly something that we have started to do the next morning. I can promise you that. And I can't find a pattern or a trend or anything like that. But if there is something along those lines, I can promise you that our analysts, our crime analysts that will use all kinds of different data collection techniques and how to analyze it and stuff will deduce that there is one. But I have not found anything along that just yet.
And Kevin, if I could just add, I'm Gordon Ramsey, I'm the police chief, and Trish, probably 2 years ago, we had an incident, another high profile incident at Airbnb, and I believe it was South before Kevin was in his position. And we began looking to see if there was any patterns, and there was a lot of chatter about it and people on Nextdoor saying, you know, and we've tried to verify each one of those stories and we couldn't really see the pattern that people were talking about. Kind of got spun up on social media and it had been quiet since then. This is the first one where we've really seen it of significance.
Captain, this is Dana Sawicki with Keller Williams Signature Partners. You had mentioned that there was legislation from the East Coast.
That is what I had read. Yes, mainly New York, Boston are the ones that had. I think it is what it is that you're going to ask.
Is there a reference that I can get later to that?
I'll get with you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any more questions regarding that part of the incident?
No.
All right, seeing none, I will now turn over to our MABCD department. So with this, I've had a lot of questions. Some of those, I think we've gotten answers to you all. But if not, just want to make sure that we can define as much as possible what our zoning code is, how this relates, maybe how it doesn't relate, where are short-term rentals allowed and where are they not allowed, what is the current process to legally do this. We know that if you are zoned SF5 without a conditional use and you operate an Airbnb, you're doing so illegally right now. So we want to talk through that process. And let you know what that is. Maybe even talk through what some of those challenges might be with this type of business model, and then just, you know, going forward from there. So I want to kick over to Mr. Wadle to talk more about kind of where we are and answer those before we get into the discussion.
Thank you very much, sir. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'll try and share a PowerPoint here. Go ahead and share my screen and take you through just some brief highlights about short-term rentals and the relationship to the zoning code. So with me here is J.R. Cox. He's in charge of our zoning enforcement division. I'm Scott Wadle, the planning director. And again, this is just a brief overview of short-term rentals and the relationship to the zoning code. So first off is what is a short-term rental? You'll hear me using that term quite a bit. For the purposes of this presentation, we're talking about a unit. It's a dwelling unit that's furnished, and it's for rent for a short duration. Different sites, there are different ways of doing this through Airbnb. You can see a number of different sites here. So what does zoning have to do with this, and especially with short-term rentals? Well, here in the city of Wichita and in Sedgwick County, we have zoning in place. It's actually the same zoning code, it's unified zoning code for both the city and the county, and it regulates the uses that properties can be put to. So you can see here just a brief illustration, different colors showing different land uses, different zoning districts for various properties. So this is a table directly out of the zoning code. So it defines, the zoning code defines different uses, and then it identifies which zoning districts those uses can be active in. And it can be a use and be permitted by right, which means there's no special qualifications you need to possess in order to move forward with that. Or it could be a conditional use, which means that you have to come before the planning commission and get a conditional use for that intent purpose, or it's denied. And so this table breaks it down and identifies whether it's a permitted use, whether it's permitted by right, whether it's conditional use. And we'll go through specifically what this means for short-term rentals, but this is just a quick introduction to the zoning code. The zoning code also includes definitions. So these define the different various land uses. And this comes into play, as you'll see in just a moment, with the short-term rentals. So there are three options in general for short-term rentals to be operating legally according to the zoning code. And this is not, doesn't have to do with the building code. We're not talking about licensing. We're just talking about strictly the zoning code for this portion of the conversation. And those three options are with on-site management, which would be option A. Option B is without on-site management, shorter than a 7-day duration. And then option C is without on-site management and at least a 7-day duration. And I'll go more in depth in each of these. I just wanted to give you a brief overview. So option A is with on-site management. And you can see here the definition of a bed and breakfast from the zoning code. And what it indicates is that the person, the manager, or the owner would have to be on site. It provides for no more than 15 transient guests. And a bed and breakfast is a conditional use in most zoning districts. So what is meant by that? Well, a conditional use in general requires a 4-step process, possibly more, depending on the outcomes of some of those. But there's an application fee, there's public notices, both that are mailed out, that a sign is posted, and that is printed in the newspaper. And there's a protest process for people who receive the notification and for others, where they have an opportunity to weigh in on that proposed use of the site. So option B, this is without on-site management for shorter than 7 days. And that meets the definition of a hotel or a motel. And again, this is for transient guests without management on site. And in general, this is if the location does not qualify as a bed and breakfast and they were operating with rentals for less than 7 days, then they would meet the definition of a hotel or motel. So hotel or motel is not permitted in a residential district. So you can see the table here identifying the zoning districts where they are permitted. I've got them listed out here. If a location meeting this definition is operating in a residential area or intends to, then it requires a rezoning.
Can I ask a quick question? I have operated an Airbnb there and didn't realize, well, I may have been okay, but I should have gone through the process of requesting, even though I talked to my direct neighbors about it and they were okay with that. And I am on site most of the time. There have been a few times that I've been out of town where I have what they call guest hosts or assistant hosts through Airbnb. And my neighbors or close friends that live nearby have helped host or been there to get the people in. How does that enter into the on-site management part of it?
I'll tell you, that's a really specific situation. I'll tell you what, can we cover that one maybe at the end?
All right, sorry.
Yeah, even
No
offline
problem.
maybe because it is so specific.
All right.
But good question. So in terms of a rezoning, what would be needed for a rezoning? It's generally a 5-step process, maybe more again, depending on how those steps go. There's again an application fee. There's public notices that are sent out through the mail. A sign is posted. There's a notice published in the newspaper, and there's a process where protests can be submitted and feedback provided on that proposed use. And then option C is if they want to operate without on-site management, but they are the rental is for at least 7 days. And in this situation, if it's with a family or no more than 5 unrelated people, then it's defined as single family dwelling, and that is allowed in all residential districts. So those are the 3 ways that our zoning code regulates or impacts short-term rentals, and that is a very brief overview. I'm going to move on to zoning enforcement because I think that's something that a lot of folks are curious about and how that works, and then afterwards we can take questions on any of this and we can go back through it. But for zoning enforcement, so what happens if you suspect or you're aware that there's a zoning violation? Well, we operate on a complaint basis. So we would look to see if there's a complaint. Once we've received one, then we review it to make sure that it's complete or that it's got enough information for us to act on it. The case gets assigned. Then one of our staff people does a case investigation. If we find that there is likely a violation, then we provide notice to the property owner. We seek to have them address it, and if they do, then it's resolved and we close the case. If not, then we take it to court to have it resolved there. So that is a brief overview about the relationship between zoning, what's currently in our zoning code, how short-term rentals are regulated currently, and also how the zoning enforcement operates at a very high level. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
So
Thanks, Cap.
I have 2 questions on that. And thank you for doing this, by the way. I'm Elizabeth Barker. So in order to enforce the zoning, my understanding is that we actually do have to file a complaint. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. We operate on a complaint basis.
Okay, and then going through your flow chart, you send a notice to the property owner and then it's resolved yes or no, and if not, you go to court. How would the property owner resolve it if we filed a complaint that, so how does that resolve without a person saying, oh, well, we're done with our Airbnb? Because they're not going to be, I would think.
Well, in that case, then they would either have to, if they're operating as a bed and breakfast, then they would have to get the conditional use for that site. Yeah, if they're operating it in the way that meets the definition of a hotel or motel, then they would have to get a rezoning, or as you've indicated, they could cease doing the Airbnb.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Question, sir.
Yeah.
Can you help describe what are the conditional use options and what are the conditions and how does that approval happen? You had the flow chart, but what does the conditional use qualify as?
Yeah, it's essentially it's a process where the MAPC, the Planning Commission, would have to approve that use, and if there are any protests on it, then it would be considered by the governing body, which would be the City Council in this case. And so in terms of the conditions for specifics, for a bed and breakfast, I'm trying to think if there are supplementary use conditions, because they do apply depending on what the conditional use is. We're going to look that up and get that back to you. But that's essentially the process.
Other than usage within the property, if someone were to file a conditional use on a traditional residential property, is there any extra equipment, placarding, safety requirements inside the property or inspections thereof required by the owner to get conditional use approved?
Sure, great question. JR, any insights?
I think from a zoning standpoint, I don't think there would be. They would simply have to go through the process. Of course, they'd have to get approved. And I would just assume that through the process, the planning commission can attach conditions as they see fit to try to ensure compatibility with the surrounding area. And we do have a few true bed and breakfast operations operating in Wichita. There are a few. As for the structure itself, that would be a building code question. I am not certain how the building code views those. Obviously, if it's a hotel motel, true hotel motel, it'll have to meet commercial building standards. It'll be a commercial building. But on a residential bed and breakfast, my guess is if there's some level of regulation in both the building code and the fire code, but I don't know what that is. And then, of course, it has to be properly developed as a bed and breakfast as well. So there may well be things required like parking, for instance, possibly landscaping or screening and some other things like that, just as part of the conditional use.
And I would caution that the building code is different than the zoning code.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm looking at the zoning code right now. I've looked it up. Bed and breakfast inn, there's no supplementary conditions that would automatically apply to that. So as JR's indicated, there may be special conditions that the planning commission may attach to the conditional use and given the unique circumstances of the site or the property. But there are none that would generally apply as part of the conditional use.
That's right. Even limiting the number of guests, the transient guests, could be part of that conditional use. The definition may allow up to 15, but perhaps the area and or the home size just won't allow that many. So it's very possible that there could be a limitation on the number as well.
So I wanted to just recap what you said in that if an Airbnb, we're talking Airbnbs, we're trying to, if an Airbnb rents for more than a week, then they're really okay in a residential area. But if they're less than a week, they're really not okay currently. And that's an oversimplification, I get that. But one thing, how do people who are trying to list their house as an Airbnb, how do they know that they're not allowed to list for less than a week? How does the city communicate that? Because Airbnb is not telling people anything.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I did not know that. And I have since, I thought I had all of my listings unlisted, but they are now.
So, but that's one thing that I'd like to have come out of this conversation, I hope, is a better path for the city to communicate to people who are listing their house on Airbnb to know what the rules are. And I know you're already on that. I know you guys are probably 2 steps ahead already. But I also had the question of, we had 2 years ago even an Airbnb situation where there was less than a week and parties were happening and it was a problem with neighbors, just like this, but it wasn't with violence, thankfully. And the police absolutely were aware. So I guess reporting it to the police was not okay to make a complaint. So is there a way that the police can be a part of that complaint structure? Because I think if people are having a party, their first thought is going to be 911. I mean, my situation 2 years ago, somebody was getting cursed out, and they were just done with being cursed out by these party people. And they called the police. Can the police help educate? Well, here's who you have to complain to, or can the police make that complaint so that people aren't, calling the police thinking that they're doing their job. And then the police aren't following through necessarily with the people who need to get the complaint to get it handled. Thanks.
Vice Mayor. Can I talk for just a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
This is Bob. This is for Trish and for several of you who've been talking about Airbnb. It's ironic, but about an hour before this meeting, I had a representative from Airbnb reach out, and they want to know what they can do to help. They actually have a program that addresses properties that are being utilized as party locations and not meeting their corporate mission. And so they want to work with us on this. And
Great.
what I'm trying to do is take notes regarding these kinds of concerns. And then when we meet with the Airbnb representative, which would probably be in the next day or two, we'll be able to kind of to address what your issues are and see how they as a company are willing to tackle those problems.
Good.
Thanks, Bob. I probably should have mentioned that too. I got the email as well and said I wanted to talk to them tomorrow and let them know about this conversation tonight. So we'll probably just do that as a team and follow up. So thanks, Bob.
Can I ask another question, loop back into the conditional use
go ahead.
rezoning request? It's real simple. If somebody applies for rezoning and there is a public notification process, where is that posted? So how would we as residents be able to, because I don't think any of us would be okay. We would all prefer to not have Airbnbs in the neighborhood. Most of us would prefer that. Where do we need to look to see if somebody has applied for a rezoning?
Sure. There's a number of different ways. So the first way would be if there's a notification area, generally within the city, it's 200 feet from the boundary of the property.
Okay.
And depending on the size of the property, it could be larger than that for the notification area, but state law dictates that it would be 200 feet at least. And so notices would be mailed out to every property owner within the 200 feet. The second method would be that a development application sign would be required to be posted on the property prior to the planning commission meeting. And that sign will have the case number on it and a phone number for people to contact for more information. The third way is that we are required to publish information about the case in the public hearing in the newspaper. Now, I understand that not everyone gets the newspaper or checks out the fine print for the legal notices, but the other method too would be that we do post our agendas. So if someone does see the sign or is aware that there's a case coming, they can find out which agenda it's on. And as always, they can always call in. And on our website, we just recently got the ability where folks can type in the case number and they can see information about the case.
Hey, Scott, this is Camila. Could I jump in and add that is it also true that the city added an extra notification by notifying the neighborhood or president or homeowners association president if you have their correct contact information?
That is very much true, and thank you for the reminder. Yes, if your neighborhood association has contact information with the city manager's office, that is the distribution list that we use to send notices to the neighborhood and HOAs.
So if I may chime in, because that's certainly an area that I'm interested in. I'm the current president of the College Hill Neighborhood Association. So I would get a listing of anybody who's trying to open an Airbnb in College Hill. But I just reached out to somebody in Crown Heights and they said Crown Heights does not any longer have an active neighborhood association. And so there would not be that personal contact of a neighbor getting notified that this is going on in your neighborhood, which sort of to me is, we all need to have a neighborhood association and work together. Another thing to add to the list, I know, but it is one of the ways that, helps us to have great neighborhoods is to have those associations.
You cannot establish an HOA to an existing neighborhood. I've checked this out legally and talked to lawyers about it that write homeowner association covenants. If the neighborhood is already established, in order to create an HOA for Crown Heights, north, south, whatever, 100% of residents would have to sign off on it. It would have to be unanimous.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about
this is Tex Dozier. We don't need a neighborhood. We don't need a HOA. We're talking about neighborhood association. And I'm on the district advisory board. I've only joined in the last few months. I live at 2nd and Parkwood. I would be happy to be the point of contact for a neighborhood association to get the word out to individuals, because that's separate from an HOA. To have a neighborhood association, which is a conduit for communication from the city, and relevant to this conversation and what was just presented, I feel that type A category that was brought up, something that should be discussed is if you have on-site management for anyone in Crown Heights or College Hill, especially those in College Hill who have accessory apartments. Our places for people plan is going to potentially allow accessories apartments in these neighborhoods without zoning approval. It sounds like that if you have a shared property where you are on site, having someone in your house as a guest, or you're using your accessory apartment, your add-on above your garage, for example, that would fall under the current allowance, which I know is separate from what I originally brought up, which I'm happy to do the neighborhood association thing. But I feel like that should be clarified as well, because there's a lot of Airbnb owners who are confused on that too, who are on site with their properties and worried about falling under some illegality within 7 days. Is that correct on the clarification? There's a lot of confusion on this.
Yeah, Tex, one clarification on that is that if the owner is on site, it would qualify as a bed and breakfast, and they would still need to get a conditional use for that property in order to operate it. So there would be the public notice that it would go before the planning commission, and it would be public comment.
Got it. Well, with the vice mayor on the call and others from city staff, that might be something to consider, especially putting in a potential accessory apartment allowance with the Places for People plan.
Yeah, and the Places for People plan doesn't propose to change that process for a bed and breakfast.
I'm curious what the status is for zoning enforcement on the Batten property where the incident occurred.
I can briefly talk about that. A notice has been issued to that property owner, and I'm waiting for contact from that property owner.
And then the one on Parkwood, has a complaint been filed on the Airbnb on Parkwood?
I've seen that mentioned, but I don't have an address, so I'm going to try to find it. But if someone has an address for the one on Parkwood this person owns, that'd be really great.
We will provide that for you, sir. I believe that can be had. No worries on that front. That leads into kind of the next question that I know, JR, you and I have traded emails on, that I think we need some clarification just as a neighborhood as well to ensure that we are doing things and not creating nuisance reports or things like that. We need to understand what truly constitutes a violation of the current zoning. Is it something as simple as offering it to let for less than the days allowed? Is it allowing someone on the property following a reservation less than the allowed days? That's a clarification that I definitely would like to see, as well as we understand it, to make sure that when we alert your department, we're giving you the proper information in the proper time frame.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Actually using the property for a short-term stay, so seeing people coming in and out, watching one right now, another part of town, and we're watching the traffic flow, and so far we're able to establish at least 2 different groups of vehicles that have come and gone in a short period of time. I was also able to match the property on a short-term stay site using exterior photos with the actual property, and I had a reported complaint with a specific address on it. So seeing people coming in and out, and particularly if you then see it on a short-term site, those are 2 good indicators, and that's what we would want to know.
Scott, this is Dana Sawicki. How are you? Keller Williams. Did I hear you say that the People for Places does not, or it does change the Airbnb zone?
No, Places for People does not make any changes to the way that zoning handles bed and breakfasts. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Does it change any zoning as to Airbnbs? Like, would it be the same with the little apartment thing that Tex was talking about? Would that be able to be rented for less than 7 days?
No, it does not make any changes to the way that short-term rentals are addressed by the zoning code.
Perfect, thank you.
So the city council would need to clarify whether someone's renting an entire place versus renting a shared space or an accessory apartment alongside this Places for People plan if they wanted to change it.
Is that a statement or a question? I'm sorry.
That's a question. I'm just trying to figure out if we're putting in this plan, allowing folks to have accessory apartments, it would be probably good because I separate a house that's an entire rental where there could be parties happening versus a house that someone's looking as a side hustle that they developed and that they're on site. And you have one person like myself who's visiting a city for work or potentially to move, and they want to stay in the neighborhood where they might want to live. That's very different than the situation that came up. And I wouldn't want that to be caught up in the regulations otherwise.
I guess is the question, is there a differentiation between short-term rentals that are used for visiting versus short-term rentals that are used for parties?
Or more a shared space, a house that's a shared space versus a house that someone's renting out in its entirety, as you can classify on Airbnb, for example.
I think it's a good point not to exclude everything, just, this is bad, bad, bad. But it's good to have the regulations, and I think it's the same regulations for short term regardless, and that's fine. But I don't think you should just say they're all going to be for parties or they're all going to be for people
wait,
checking out the
clarification,
neighborhood or whatever.
point of clarification here, because it sounds different. Renting out a whole property for a single family for greater than 7 days is allowed in the code right now. But what I heard is for bed and breakfast or subdivisions of a single property that are owner occupied, even regardless of duration of stay, that requires bed and breakfast conditional usage permits under your current zoning. Is that accurate?
It's the distinction there, and I can bring up the PowerPoint if we need it, but the distinction is really 7 days. If you're more than 7 days, then just as you said, it's defined as single family housing, and it's allowed without any additional conditional use or whatnot. If it's less than 7 days, then the distinction becomes, is the owner on site and or manager, and if yes, then it qualifies as a bed and breakfast, which requires the conditional use. If the owner or the manager is not on site, or for whatever reason it doesn't meet the definition of a bed and breakfast, then it qualifies as a hotel motel, and it requires a rezoning because if it's in a residential zone district right now, because those are not allowed in residential zoning districts.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
These are great questions. It's very, it's a complex thing, and you're seeing this for the first time, and so I appreciate the questions and the opportunities to clarify. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi. So it's a given that there's people operating right now under 7 days. You can get on Airbnb right now. So we know that they're being letted for less than a week. How are you going to enforce that? That's why Jason asked the question, is it when they, just advertise it, where you can get on there and reserve for 2 days? How do we,
Sure.
How do we address this? Because it's being violated right now.
Yeah.
And I know it's a tough one, with resources and stuff, but how exactly can you address it? Because it's happening right now and they don't have CUPs.
We've done it online, so.
The first point is that we do it on a complaint basis, so there would have to be a complaint. So then I think the second part of your question, sir, was then what kind of information is helpful for making sure that the complaint includes information that's helpful for us. And I think JR has pointed out that we look to see, are there multiple vehicles visiting the site with different license plates, information like even was there a review from the property where someone posted great stay, just stayed there a couple nights, really enjoyed it, thought it was wonderful. Well, that can be shown as evidence of people staying there for less than 7 days. JR, what else would be helpful?
And finding it, being able to match it on the site, easily match it on the site, whatever site that might be. to the actual physical property. And there, I ran across one site that only offered stays of no less than 7 days. It was a 7-day to 3 or 4 month site, I think. So those are out there, and I've seen on Airbnb myself in the past. I've never used Airbnb personally, but I have seen that some units are only available for a span of 1 week. Or more.
Well, and in addition to just relying on complaints and having staff check those out from a zoning standpoint, again, I think this is where we can engage Airbnb. And what we'll be asking them is how they monitor those short stays. They specifically know that this is a problem, not just in Wichita, but in other cities, that that some of these locations become party sites. And so we're going to ask them how they track that and how they can then provide data to us and how we can help them in terms of shutting those short-term stays, like a one-night stay, for instance, down.
Aren't they responsible to pay taxes? Aren't they responsible to pay any kind of taxes to the city for any length of stay?
Right now, Airbnbs do not pay taxes as a hotel motel.
It can be set up that way, though.
Actually, can I mention something?
Sure.
Typically on Airbnb and VRBO, they do collect both state, county, and also the city lodging taxes.
Should we
Yeah,
also
we'll need some,
reach
but-
out to VRBO and Home Share or whatever? I'm not sure. There's a couple of others that are out there. And I don't know if Miss Lonk's homes were listed on those or not. I haven't checked that out.
Well, and if I could ask Mr. Layton, when you do speak with the Airbnb representative, I think there's probably a way that they can include certain zip codes and not actually even offer people the option to list for less than a week. Because it's right now an option, that you can list for, 1 to 2 days or whatever, but that they can make it where these zip codes, they can't list for less than a week. And that would be ideal.
That would be
Because then
perfect.
you're not, people instantly get educated.
Right.
I have a question for Bob Layton. Bob, when you speak to Airbnb, I mean, I'm assuming that they sign a contract that people that rent out properties for Airbnb, they sign a contract with Airbnb to be a host.
Right.
And I would assume that they put in there that you have to comply with local regulations. So basically, when they operate for under 7 days, I guess they can play dumb and say they don't know the code. But when they operate for less than 7 days, it's like fraudulent, really.
Well,
and I would assume Airbnb has the ability to run a computer program and spit out the info instantly and go, this is the zoning in the city of Wichita for SF5. You cannot do it. And you would think they'd be able to program it immediately where you couldn't go under 7 days. I would think Airbnb would be able to do that. That's our zoning. And then people that want to rent that occupy, they have to go file for a CUP under the current zoning. So it's kind of simple as that, it seems to me.
Yeah, Chuck, more than happy to talk to them about that.
Thank you.
Hey, my name's Gary Macher. Can everybody hear me? I'm sorry I didn't put my name up there, but my question is to the city, what can we do to make stiff fines for those that don't comply?
JR's gonna tackle that one.
So the fines are specified in our zoning code. These are misdemeanor criminal charges. The court is a criminal court. The court proceeds accordingly. The burden of proof is on the city that they have violated the code. And the judge would need to look at the evidence, find the operator guilty, and then assess the fine. It can be up to $500 or 6 months in jail or both for each offense charged.
So it can start on offense 1. Do
Well,
you give them a warning, I guess, first, and then the second warning, and then you charge them, or how? I mean, what's the legal process?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the ability. I know a lot of folks just in talking over the years think that we just find people. We don't have the ability to just find people. We have to go and actually take them to court and have the case tried in court and prevail. And so yes, we would give them a notice. Depending on the response back, they may give another final notice. And then if they're still violating and we feel that we can prove they're violating, then we can take them and put them into the court system.
So can the $500 be raised even more?
I believe misdemeanor criminal acts are statutorily regulated. It is possible we would need to work with the law department on that. I'm not certain at all that it can be. I think the state regulates it, but that's certainly a question that we can ask.
We need a discouragement.
John, I have a question. This is Chuck. When there's a criminal act like this, does it automatically escalate to the judge?
No, everyone has a right to due process. So that's why they've been given a notice. And if they comply and they don't rent this out anymore, or they don't rent it out in violation of our code, then no, it won't go to the judge.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments on this part, looking at the zoning code and where we are now?
Have we looked at other cities, Brandon? How they're dealing with this in neighborhoods like ours, single family?
I will kick that to Scott.
Yeah, we have had staff members contact 25 cities, 24. Okay, with a fair number of them here in Kansas, just to find out what their process is and how they handle short-term rentals. So we're at the very beginning of our research on this, but we've identified which ones use registration, which ones require a permit or a license, which ones assess an accommodation or a sales tax on it, which ones require inspections, notifications, and the like. So we've got a number of criteria that we've evaluated them against, and we have a staff person who's just done this cursory review, and we're now starting to kind of dig into the nuts and bolts and mechanics about how it works.
Thanks, Scott.
I appreciate everyone's help.
Let me ask one more question.
I'm speaking for a lot of people, I'm sure in the neighborhood. I appreciate you all helping us understand the law. And Vice Mayor Johnson, I'm assuming this is probably the next place you're going to go. But my next question is, we understand the law, we understand the reporting as best as we can given the moment right now. What's our next steps as a city, or what's the initiatives that you see coming relating to the usage of the property in this way? Are there changes coming that you see right now that are in the pipe? Or is this where you're looking for ideas on how we progress forward as a community?
Yeah, Jason, you are great at forecasting. So that was my next question after we got done. I know Chuck had something else to say, but after that, if there was nothing else, I wanted to get into solutions and ideas. It was important to me to work with you all as a neighborhood, as the city is gonna, again, have a conversation with Airbnb and look at what's going on with places for people and potential solutions, to kind of hear from you all what you thought as neighborhood residents. So before we jump into that, Chuck, I saw you on mute right before I said that.
You know what? It fits right into what you're saying. I was kind of like, what's the will of the city in this regard? Because we're talking about zoning that's across the city. It's a big deal. And, it's evident that it's pretty rampantly not being advised. I've researched the cities, people put 30-day stays on there in some cases. Every type of lawsuit has been filed. Residents against the city against Airbnb. I mean, you name it, it's all there. So it gets down to, the will of the city. I don't think I think most people in this area don't want Airbnbs in the neighborhood. They prefer single family residents. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, I mean, this is a fairly common, issue out there, nationwide. And what is the general thinking or will of the city? And I guess where I'm going is there's so many perspectives. I would think you'd want to, have licensing where you get money. Taxing is a situation that comes up. I mean, these are things that benefit the city. A requirement for a CUP, that's pretty significant, requirement. Most people wouldn't be able to do that. They just wouldn't have the will to do it. But I'm just curious, kind of what your perspective is, because it's fairly common out there and, all over the place. And, what's the thought process right now? Or do we have to go full on to try to get a zoning, some kind of big zoning change, or, what's going to be realistic?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So just in short, we work for you. So, it was in all of our interest to have this conversation tonight. That's why it's public. That's why it's on social media. We've got all our different departments, city manager's office. I've told my colleagues, because of COMA, we all couldn't be on the Zoom, but they are paying attention as well. And what we wanted to do is hear some of your thoughts and ideas. We'll kind of weigh that with where we currently are with zoning and how that's impactful. And I think the one key, though, is to consider, we definitely want to protect neighborhoods and how they are, but then you also have the property rights argument as well. So someone who owns a home, who can actually kind of do what they want to do, or, should have that kind of right. And how can we find a compromise that works with the property rights versus keeping the neighborhood safe, secure, quiet, as Crown Heights is? That's kind of where this discussion is. So there's a lot of pieces to that. We do have different people on the call as well from the Realtors Association. And, that's up to conversation. So what does taxing look like? What does licensing look like? I know the process right now, it is pretty extensive. When you have to pay $1,200 to go through a conditional use permit, that's significant. There are people who have short-term rentals that may not even make $1,200. They just do it every now and then. So that's a conversation that we really wanted to have with you all to see what you thought. And you can help shape kind of our dialogue going forward, our dialogue that we're going to have with Airbnb tomorrow, and probably several more dialogues with them. So really wanted to open up to that. You all kind of set the floor and foundation for that. What are some of your thoughts? If you have specific concerns about just keeping the neighborhood quiet, what does that look like? Right now, again, it was said that if somebody wanted to rent out longer than 7 days, they could. So what are some things that we need to consider as far as addressing and modernizing what we do? Airbnb is not necessarily brand new, but that short-term rental business model is something that continues to grow. So how can we address that effectively without trampling on property rights, and also without trampling on the rights of the neighborhood to remain safe and quiet?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In regards to the houses that were closed down by the one the lady owned, she bought those specific houses to use as an Airbnb. So we're getting people who are coming in and buying homes. There's quite a few in the neighborhood here. And how do you monitor a company coming in, buying a home and placing people in it, and they don't live in the neighborhood at all? And they have they never come to the neighborhood. They never see what's going on in these houses. That's what happened on 2nd and Batten, is it was unsupervised. And that's the scary thing for me, is people are just buying up homes in Crown Heights because it's a beautiful area. It's not too expensive, and they can start a business in a neighborhood which we have 2 schools just a couple of blocks away. We have family members with multiple children opposite that home. There has to be some regard for the people who have bought houses here and live here. And I just want to ask what can be done to protect our neighborhood from becoming a hotel motel area. Do we just put out a sign that says, stay here? And there's no regard for the people that actually have bought homes here and live here, is what I feel. So that's my concern.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that kind of leads again to the conversation that we're having right now. And that is, as a citizen, I'm free to buy the property I want as long as I can pay for it. And then the question would be, what is my intention for that? And that would come down to either zoning or, in my opinion, and Scott and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, looking at some form of licensing. So if I have the intention to go to Crown Heights and buy a beautiful home for a short-term rental, is there a license that I need to know about and apply for that then will notify the neighborhood or keep a database of such? that may not go through the whole $1,200 process of conditional use permitting. I mean, that's kind of where we were getting at is what would be your suggestion? And I think personally, I think a licensing option is probably the quickest and easiest. I'm going to buy this house. I know what I want to use it for. I go to the city and say, this is what I want to do. This is the cost to me. And now there's a list of that. The other processes, conditional use, it still notifies the neighborhood and all of that, but it takes a little longer. So again, that's just kind of where we're going. We know right now there's not a whole lot we can do just from stopping somebody from buying a property, but what are some things you would think that would kind of help notify the neighborhood and kind of give you what you're looking for?
And Vice Mayor, this is Camila speaking. How does this conversation of licensing differ from those who purchase property and manage them as the senior care homes, as the other complaints that you've gotten? And I see some heads nodding. So to me, this would be a twofold as we look at this conversation, and we know that a state legislature has to be involved in this too, but just the right to live where you want to live is a concern.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a couple things. We also have the same issue in rentals, right? When we have people from out of state that buy rental properties and they don't live here, they don't come visit. I do believe they have to have local management. They have to have somebody in town that manages them and is able to be there if, the window gets busted out or things like that. But part of what I wanted to say too is that nobody's going to rent a house for a week. I don't think. You guys tell me what you think. I don't think somebody's going to rent a house for a week to have a party on one day. And so that's just a big investment as far as, to have a party for one day to rent it out for 7 days. And so to some degree, as far as keeping the partying down and away, actually enforcing or allowing Airbnb or VRBO to not list for less than 7 days, I think sort of handles some of that party problem. And I honestly sort of like the idea of not having to go through a whole rigmarole if you're renting your house for a week because you're going to be on a vacation and you're trying to make some money with your property. You're trying to have people there for a week and not just to have a party, right? But I think I'm not necessarily keen on setting up a whole huge process for people to VRBO or Airbnb their house for a week. I'm not sure about the whole flip side of somebody who, like you were saying, Chuck's wife, I don't know your name, that they bought this house for that business model. That seems like a little bit of a different thing to me versus an owner who's renting out their home for a week while they're out of town or something like that. So those are just some of my thoughts.
One thought that I've had coming into all of this, and I'm someone who's very, very close to this property. Literally, I look out my window and it's in my backyard. But the thing I keep coming back to is the things that happen in Airbnb homes, whether they make the news or not, are the same things that happen in regular homes across the country. They happen in regular neighborhoods. Parties happen and they get out of hand. The challenges are just when those properties are brought in, those parties and events are brought in by people outside the neighborhood without notification and things along those lines. So we really have to acknowledge, what is the nature of the situation. Airbnbs don't beget parties, people beget parties. And it's having the oversight and the control and the ability to get in front of those situations as a neighborhood and as a community before they happen. One thought that I've had around that is a registration, a tracking, and a fee relating to, contributing to community policing, where if a home is being let in a short-term rental, the owner is going to collect a nightly fee for that reservation, going to have to report it to the police and a registration, and that's going to allow it for the police to be able to do a drive-by during the evening if they would like to, if they have availability. Of course, if they have availability, Captain, you could say can be pretty slim to none some evenings, but at least that would maybe create some funding that might create an extra vehicle to allow more people to pay overtime to be on staff during those Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights when a party might pop up at an Airbnb.
Well, I appreciate that a lot of people want perhaps changes that would allow, it sounds at least to me like what I'm hearing is maybe some people think the current rule requiring a permit for even, like a couch type thing, or let's say you're out of town. One of my concerns is, let's say you are out of town and you rent out your house. You are not on site to make sure that, something's not going on right there. You are not available if your window's broken or a party does break out. And it's my understanding from what I have, again, this is what I've heard from other people, but the owner of this property at least claims that she did speak with the person who rented the property and was told that it was going to be used for a brunch on Sunday. So just because someone doesn't offer that it is a party doesn't mean that it's not going to be one. And I appreciate that people want to preserve the idea that you can rent out your home just, because, yeah, I've used VRBO and Airbnb before, but I do think we have to consider that there's not a lot of oversight that as a homeowner, there's not a whole lot you can do always to prevent this kind of thing from happening. And I also think that making changes to the current rules that would allow, for example, okay, it's fine if I do this for my home because I live here most of the time, but I can rent it out when I'm not in town, but I'm not going to allow somebody to do that, I don't know, very often. That's to me where it gets very difficult, I would think, for the city to actually enforce that. Somebody can say they're living there. They could come and stay there a week each month, but then they're able to rent out their house the rest of the time. So I don't know, at least I'm just hearing, to me, it sounds like people are thinking that the current rule maybe is too restrictive, but I don't necessarily think that it is.
There are a lot of things you can do as a homeowner to prevent that situation by reading reviews, making sure there are multiple good reviews from different places that these people have stayed. And also by having a dialogue with those people before they come to see if you get a feeling that they're really doing what they say they're going to be doing, asking for pictures before they do it, seeing driver's license to assure what their ages are, that you can do some things. And it just wasn't handled responsibly. This house was not handled responsibly.
No, that is the culpability of the property owner at the time, and it's not necessarily something for the city to be able to necessarily enforce. That speaks directly to the culpability of the property owner and their responsibility to the neighborhood. I pasted an article in the chat a while ago around a city in California that puts a requirement in that the property owner must live within 30 minutes of the property being listed. Something around that line. Along that line might help, but even then, it's the way the law is right now, 7 days, and personally, I don't have any desire to see it changed. But I also understand very much, as you're saying, Vice Mayor, around property rights. I'm an advocate of that as well. But neighborhoods are a different situation at times.
I have a comment. I think that if we just focus on enforcing the current zoning, to me, the easiest way is the city insists that these companies enforce the 7-day policy in SF5, and they can do it on their computer program. I mean, they can program it. I know they can't. I mean, they've set up Airbnb. I think they can program that one. And then if it goes under there, there's got to be an increase, some type of licensing, something that creates a bar for people, a different accountability, a different level of responsibility that they have to go through to, if they're owner occupants, so they're operating a bed and breakfast, maybe it's not a CUP, but it's something that creates a bar. But to me, the easiest way to enforce the policy and the most efficient way to do it is those companies limit what is allowed on their websites. They have to register for 7+ days. It's over. And then, otherwise we get into city monitoring and, and limited resources and, all these things. And it just seems unrealistic. The second thing is if we could do an overlay like College Hill, Crown Heights type thing, where we're not asking to pass a zoning change for the whole city. Let's just focus realistically on our own area. Is there a way to put something in that creates a district or something that allows us to have more input about the regulations we want?
Chuck, I disagree. If we've got that 7 day, this needs to be everywhere because I don't want to hear about this popping up in Riverside or Delano or nobody deserves this.
I agree that would cover anyone in Wichita immediately. Tactic 1. Yeah, it seems like that's now, and that would cover it for the whole city. But, to me, that's realistic. Bob Layton talks to Airbnb and says, we need to see this. They have of course, they have an army of lawyers because they're in lawsuits 24 hours a day. But to me, that's the easiest way to enforce this right now. And when we go beyond that, then, we can talk about the zoning and if we need to increase the licensing and if, a CUP is required, or can we do an overlay in our area that's a little stricter versus rivers, so at least, but I'm just thinking realistically right now, under 7 days, what can we do?
Yeah.
And it just seems like that's the most immediate. And then we can start getting into the zoning.
Just worry about Crown Heights and what we can do to change what's happening here. And the city, has to pay attention to Crown Heights, that we want a certain thing for Airbnb, 7 days, of course, but also notification to the city of all the houses that are here and a registration of those homes and the nights that they've stayed. They're taking money. They have, they have a registration on who goes there and how long they're there. Why don't they give that information to the city zoning people? And it's a requirement every month. You have a printout, you give it to the zoning in the city. That will stop illegal 1 and 2 nights, I guarantee you. But it's a law change, so.
I agree with Chuck.
If we went through that process and we went through a comprehensive plan update, is that retroactive or would that only be for future zoning?
I'm signing off of Airbnb. I'm not doing it anymore.
It would only be for future.
Okay, so even if we did that, it would only be for future purchases in the neighborhood. It wouldn't be retroactive to folks who already have an Airbnb.
Well, if it's a company that owns it, I think they need to be responsible enough. They've got the finances to buy these homes. They have to be responsible to report to the city what's going on in those homes that affects our neighborhood.
But that's what the zoning.
I know. So there needs to be some paper trail. To me, it's these people are just setting up homes. She lives half an hour away. There's a shooting. It's twice. It's happened. There's something going on. It's not a good feeling. So I think we can nip it in the bud by just doing a paper trail of who stays in her homes, for how long, how much money she's earning. I mean, something needs to be regulated so that we don't have that ever happening again.
Vice Mayor, if I could maybe summarize what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So first of all, we want to talk to Airbnb about the short-term problem, as Chuck said. What can we do to keep the party houses from going forward? So that's the first issue. Second issue I'm hearing is what kind of discussion can we have with them to put all of their members on notice that are in Wichita that we have zoning regulations they have to follow, including conditional use requirements if they're in a single family residential area. So that'll be the second conversation or piece of the conversation we'll have with them. And then I think the third part of it was the issue of licensing, which Vice Mayor, you mentioned. And if there is licensing, what's the purpose of that, right? To me, probably the most important thing is we can develop a database for all of you that what's going on in your neighborhood. So even if they're following all of our requirements from a zoning standpoint, you still want to know that they're there, right? And so, and we all know there's going to be people moving in and out of a neighborhood. Maybe that's something someone's going to want to search before they make a decision on buying a property. I don't know, but those are the three things I'm hearing as the big issues that you want us to look at going forward. Is that accurate?
How about responsibility of realtors to report if they find out that that's the intent of the sale?
That's not a realtor's place.
Okay, I didn't know if it could be or not.
A thought that I had, it kind of tailors with also with the registration, the licensing and the tracking. I understood, and I may be misunderstanding, but when a property reaches like a nuisance level property, not to say that all Airbnbs are nuisance level properties, but when a property reaches that level, the property owner can be subject to the costs associated with emergency services responding to events at that facility. Speaking to the responsibility of the owners to vet out the people staying in their property, I think that it wouldn't be, if we continue with the licensing, a consideration also within that licensing should possibly be a liability to the property owner, to the city and to the city resources that may need to respond to emergency situations of certain types at their short-term rental properties, just because they're bringing people in, and if they're not going to be able to supervise them, or they need to be accountable to the community for who they're allowing into our facilities.
Yeah, Jason, the only caution I have is that we've not seen a lot of problems with Airbnbs and other rental properties like this, right? So you're right. I mean, I don't want us to go too far. The reason we have that nuisance ordinance in place is because we were experiencing very significant problems, as you know, with hotels, certain hotels around the city, and we had exhausted all the other remedies.
Absolutely.
I think from an enforcement standpoint, I don't know that this is a tremendous burden, and I think we have tools to be able to address those. And the good thing is, I think we have companies that are willing to help us on the other end, right? So it's our enforcement, along with what Airbnb wants to do to preserve the right to be even to have these properties in our city. So I think we'll be able to address it in that way. And I'll let the police representatives jump in on that if they disagree. But I hear what you're saying. I think there's not quite a parallel to what we were experiencing on problem hotels.
Fair enough.
Well, to Jason's, I'm sorry, Mr. Layton. Apologies.
Go ahead, Tex.
Well, to Jason's point, like not all of these, even if you own the property, you can still have a party house. And so something I'm worried about moving forward with potential regulation is what would be the fee for licensing. And I do not want to see a price prohibitive fee for folks who are good local Wichitans who want to lease out a part of their property or maybe one of their other properties in town, and they're not able to do so. The other thing I worry about is separating those shared places of a single family as well as the accessory apartments. So I would say when you were summing it up, we seriously have to consider with places for people, if you're going to allow folks to have these accessory apartments, they need to have that ability to rent those properties out. I will say for myself, before moving up here, coming from Texas, I candidly stayed in the Airbnb in Crown Heights to get a feel of the neighborhood before I decided to buy a property in the neighborhood. And I've been a property owner for 3 years now. And I, as you said, like this is a rare incident, and that incident could happen in other properties as well, where there's a homeowner, and we shouldn't just assume or stereotype that it's going to happen just because someone is an Airbnb property. So these are my concerns, and I hope the vice mayor and other council members listening consider that when instituting these new zoning plans across the city.
That's a good point. And by the way, you brought something up on licensing. If we were to go that far, and again, that was just an idea that was floated, but if we got into licensing, traditionally we don't charge more than our cost associated with that service. So it would be the cost to develop and monitor and provide on a regular basis updates for the database the rental properties that are associated with short-term rentals.
Because many of the other cities that have licensing and high fees, what it is the hotels and their lobbyists and their special interests come in and try to put in a very high fee that makes it price prohibitive for folks to have an Airbnb. So I like the point. I think Jason mentioned maybe a per night fee versus a flat fee that's over like $1,000 or a few $100s. Even if we have a licensing fee that's more realistic, around $100 for a shared property or $200 if it's an entire property, something like that. I just don't want to be price prohibitive against these property owners and basically put them in a vice and prevent our city from having folks come in from out of town for special events, as well as if they want to move here like myself.
I have a
Appreciate
question. I just had a quick question for the planning committee, probably. I'm not sure who is the best person to address it. I'm just wondering if you could give a little bit of a timeline. What does it look like if a property owner applies for conditional zoning along with getting licensed as a bed and breakfast? And yeah, is that something that takes 3 months, half a year, a couple of weeks?
No, and in fact, when people from the coastal cities come here and they ask us about zoning, they often remark how seamless we kind of make the process and how quickly we're able to do that. JR, do you want to provide some information on the timelines for the conditional use process?
Well, yes, I guess I came in.
Oh, sorry.
I'd actually look to you for that. I mean, it's a public hearing process, so the application has to be made, has to be a complete application. It will go through a public notification. There's a public hearing. I think it's like generally. We have other folks who do this all the time. You're talking to an enforcement and the newer director, but it's a 20-day public notice, so it's probably about a month, I would say, out before you get to the planning commission. And then after the planning commission, if there's a protest, then it would go to the governor. How seamless we had. Excuse me. I don't know. And then it would go to the governing body, and then it would be final. There'd be a final decision at that point. So you're looking at 75-ish, I think approximately 75 to 90, depending on the action in the protest.
Yeah, I think it's less than that, but we're saying not more than 90 days for you to get it, definitely.
Okay, and the rezoning or the conditional zoning and the permit would all be one process, combined paperwork, or is it kind of two separate processes? You first have to get your conditional zoning and then do a permit. I'm just trying to make sure I understand sort of what it looks like.
Yeah, and if you've got specifics, please do give us a call, tomorrow, and we can talk through the specifics of a site. Okay. But in terms of you either have to, if it qualifies as a bed and breakfast, and it depends on, again, where you're located, what's the zoning district, what particular use are you looking for? Is it a bed and breakfast or is it a hotel motel? And then from there we can plot out what the course of action is. But in general, you can say it's either going to be a full rezoning or it's going to be a conditional use.
And if the question is there a license currently for a true bed and breakfast? The answer would be no. There is currently not a license for a bed and breakfast inn.
Okay, so it's really just the conditional zoning that needs to be in place.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, and then beyond that, so with that being the only thing in place, it's not like we would have to immediately be getting, an inspection for code and all of that process as well in order to be functioning, or is that part of the rezoning process as well?
An inspection from the building department isn't tied to the zoning process, but depending on what needs to be done to the structure before there's any operation, I think you have to have permits through the building folks and necessary inspections. Yes, but it's not tied to the zoning processes.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. This is Camila. Just to kind of keep along the lines of the conversation, I see some hand raised, Vice Mayor by Officer Villegas and then Miss Dana.
Yeah, I was about to call on Officer Villegas.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit with the conversation. I know Laverne had brought up the changing of the code, and other people had mentioned as to how lengthy of a process that might end up being. And to touch on what Mr. Layton had discussed just moments ago, reference licensing. We had, as he had said, we had had some issues with some of the motels and hotels in the area as it pertains to criminal activities. And while it is true, we have our nuisance ordinance, that can be a very lengthy process. We've actually developed or been in the works of developing a lodging establishment ordinance that could very well participate to this conversation. But essentially what it would do is require all lodging establishments, whether it's a hotel or a short-term rental, to purchase a license through the city and to hold that license. And to speak specifically to Airbnbs or short-term rental properties, part of the language, and I can let Ms. Dickgraf kind of piggyback on this, but we've inserted a clause that basically there would have to be somebody, a responsible party on site, as it would mirror the nuisance ordinance. The responsible party must be in the city limits and available for immediate contact if there were any kind of concerns or questions being raised by either citizens in the area or law enforcement. I know this is something that Trish and I had experienced when I was her beat coordinator in the College Hill area. But essentially there's that clause in there that says that there's a brochure. It distinguishes parking areas, terms of like noise, curfew, things of that sort, that basically gives instructions on the tenant on how to act. And now we can't control who acts and how they act, but at least we can say that that owner is in good faith relaying that information to the individual. So the accountability is now shifted back over to the tenant. That is something that we've kind of been working on. I don't know if anyone from the law department wants to comment on that, but I've been working on it for about a year now. So we're trying to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's crossed. As far as fee and cost goes, it's minimal. I think we were batting around somewhere around $100, a one-time fee. And it is something that through the nuisance ordinance, we can, it's kind of it gives the nuisance ordinance a little bit more teeth to swiftly take care of problem properties. And in this case, we would use the nuisance ordinance and the, I guess, snowball effect of the problems that we see compounding to eventually either suspend or revoke a lodging establishment license based on the history of problems that are occurring. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments on that.
Thank you, sir.
I was just going to say, I very much appreciate that, officer. And while that may head off some future ones as well, you know, unfortunately, this is another situation where this is a very unique event where literally, I believe this was the first rental of the property in question that caused this event. So the type of thing that you just, you know, absolute nightmare for absolutely everyone involved, property owner, neighbors, neighborhood, of course, the victims and everything that could be possibly brought to bear in this situation. So very much appreciate that perspective and the efforts that you're putting forward on that.
Well, and I just wanted to echo and awesome, because a lot of these renters, they don't think about what somebody's going to need when they come and rent their house. You know, which one are my trash cans? How do I recycle in Wichita? You know, that's one of the things. We had a brand new owner who didn't have trash service yet. So the you know, Airbnb renters were going to the neighbors and putting the trash in the neighbors' cans. So having that kind of a flyer that people who rent their house out are required to put together to, you know, here's your tips and tricks for renting my place or being in Wichita. I think that's pretty awesome. And like Tex said, keeping it low, keeping that cost low so that people will do it. And we can, it's not cost prohibitive. I think that's pretty important too. So thank you very much for your work.
Thanks, Trish. Dana, you had your hand up.
Yes, it's been mentioned a couple times about people for places, so Scott might be able to, and Scott, I know that we've had a lot of discussion about this over the last 3 weeks, so I might be just a little confused. But in talking about the accessory apartments, the portion of the zoning that we have just gone through and the Airbnb? Does the People for Places allow an Airbnb, and how do you differentiate between what is licensed, if you would choose to license an accessory apartment and an Airbnb? And I know the difference between them, but accessory apartments could be easily be a mother-in-law apartment, something happened, unfortunate demise, and then it be turned into an air. I mean, where does that zoning come in through with, or is it even considered in the People for Places?
Sure. Good question. So just so that folks know, Places for People is a plan. It's an element of the comprehensive plan, and it calls for, it recommends 3 different initiatives to help ensure that neighborhoods are vibrant, that we have a strong economy and a good quality of life. And one of those initiatives is looking at our zoning code and identifying potential changes to help achieve those community goals. And there are 4 things that we're talking about in terms of making changes to how accessory apartments are handled, how duplexes are handled, how small apartments, and then also single family homes on smaller than normal lots. The portion about the accessory apartments only addresses, and again, these are addressed in terms of making changes to the approval process for those land uses, but in exchange, requiring design standards so that they are respectful of the surrounding properties in the neighborhood. The zoning proposal does not propose any changes to the way that short-term rentals are addressed in the zoning code. So everything that we've talked about tonight in terms of having to get a conditional use permit if you want to operate it like a bed and breakfast, or having to get a rezoning to a different zoning district. If you start out with it in a residential district and you want to operate it there and as a hotel motel, you have to get a rezoning. It doesn't change any of that. So the Places for People zoning update proposal, it deals with the review process and design standards for 4 particular types of uses, but it does not make any changes to the short-term rentals and the way they're addressed in the zoning code.
Thank you.
Take one more question from Jason.
Last question, I swear. What is the traditional duration of a conditional usage permit? Are they perpetual? Do they recertify and reapprove on a yearly, tri-yearly, 5-year basis?
Generally, a conditional use will run with the land. In a very rare case, there have been uses in the past where that wasn't the case. Sand extraction comes to mind. Sand and gravel extraction usually has a deadline because the operation ceases and it's put to another use, usually a new subdivision. But as a rule, a conditional use runs with the land in perpetuity.
And the planning commission can change that if they choose.
They could.
For an individual property, they can assign it to expire in a certain amount of time.
So again, you said with the land, not with the land and owner.
I believe it is illegal for us to tie it to an owner. It's a land use matter which deals with the use and not who owns that use.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question, one more. It's Chuck. Vice Mayor Johnson, my vote is the city insists that their short-term rental places enforce the city's zoning requirements and give notice to their hosts. And that way it's documented, it's in, and that way, there's no wiggle room. They've been informed. That's just my vote. And that does put a damper on under 7-day rentals right now that are occupied because they don't have CUPs and they're not. But I think there is some type of licensing in between a basic license and a CUP that puts some accountability in the process so that people can do the shorter term ones responsibly. And that's just me speaking on behalf of myself. I am a resident of Crown Heights. I'm down half a block from where it happened, but that's just the immediate situation I'm looking at. Because beyond that, we start to talk about zoning changes and other things, and it's going to be it would take something significant to get that moving, it seems to me, realistically.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. All right, we are past 8 o'clock. I appreciate all of your engagement. I want to thank Camila for organizing this and all of our city team for joining in the conversation and engaging with you all. Most importantly, thank you all for jumping on the call and hearing the updates, but also letting us know some ideas and thoughts about how to address this going forward. I put in the chat, if you all could send me an email, I'd love to keep you all in the loop as we continue our conversations. My email address is bjjohnson@wichita.gov. 2 J's. If you put 1 J, it goes to Officer Johnson and he'll have to forward that to me. So again, bjjohnson@wichita.gov. Thank you all for joining. I think our city team has enough information to really start this dialogue and engage with Airbnb here in the near future. So
Vice
again,
Mayor,
yes, Camila.
if I may, could we get police to respond to 2 questions in the chat? Do we know if anyone was arrested and if the owner was held responsible from a city standpoint for this incident?
We brought somebody in for questioning the day at, well, it'd have been later on that day. That happened early Sunday morning, and later on that day, yes. We're looking for more. There were more weapons that were used. Like I said, some of the forensic data came back. So we're looking for several more people that were involved. What was the second question?
Was the owner charged with anything from a police standpoint?
Well, as they'd mentioned, as far as the planning department mentioned, there's several different things. And what we do when there's an event, we call it a trigger event. You probably saw me speak about the hotels, the officer involved shooting at the hotel 2.5 weeks ago. The hotel was cited with nuisance letters. Those are letters that we, as in the police department, will go out and issue in regards to a triggered event. It doesn't have to be a rental property, any type of event or a party or something that results in an act of violence. And then we follow up the letter, the nuisance and abatement letter, with an immediate, as the vice mayor said, an impact meeting that followed up in the neighborhood right afterwards. So yes, we did go out and cite the owner of the property.
Awesome. Thanks for those responses. All right, we will be in touch. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, city staff, thank you all for letting me keep you past 8 o'clock.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Those actions have to be right on target. Outside, the conditions have been below.